Alex, I spent the better part of yesterday afternoon just staring at my floor. Not because I lost a screw, though that happens more than I'd like to admit, but because I was trying to figure out how I managed to make a 20-foot walk between my jointer and my planer. By the time I'd milled up 3 oak boards, I felt like I'd finished a 5K.
Is that why you were winded when I walked in? I thought maybe you'd finally decided to start that shop yoga routine you keep joking about.
No yoga, just the sheer realization that I've spent years building a shop that's actively trying to keep me from getting any work done. It's funny, we spend all this money on the perfect chisel or the fancy Japanese saw, but we treat the actual floor plan like a game of Tetris played by someone who's had 3 too many espressos.
Well, today we're tackling that head on. The Tiger Den podcast, deep dive into small shop layouts. Because most of us don't have a 10,000 square foot warehouse. Most of us are fighting for every inch of a garage, a basement, or, God forbid, a spare bedroom.
Or a mobile home shop. I was reading Ralph Chapman's stuff recently, the ultimate small shop guy, and he actually talks about setting up in a mobile home. Now, that is a man who knows how to make a square inch scream for mercy.
Okay, but before we get into the extreme tiny shop Olympics, let's start with the basics. If I'm standing in an empty garage, bare concrete, one flickering light bulb, and a dream, where do I put the first thing?
You start with the journey. Think of the wood's life cycle. It's like a cruise ship, but with more chances of getting a splinter. It comes in the door as a big, heavy, ugly plank, and it wants to go from rough lumber to finished heirloom with as little sweat from you as possible. Step 1, store that wood near the door. For the love of your lower back, don't make yourself carry a 4x8 sheet of 3/4 inch plywood all the way to the back corner.
I remember when you moved that rack. You spent 3 days grumbling about how the physics of the shop were shifted.
It's true, but man, when you can back your truck up, slide those boards right onto the rack, and then, here's the kicker, have your miter saw right there, that's the first big win. You cut them down to size immediately. No more walking 15 feet with a 12-foot board, trying not to knock over your drill press like a row of dominoes.
Okay, so heavy stuff stays by the door. But once it's cut to length, it's gotta get flat and square. That's where the triad comes in, right?
Exactly. The joiner, the planer, and the table saw. They're the 3 musketeers of the shop. You're going to be bouncing back and forth between them like a pinball. If you've got the space, you want them grouped so you can reach one while still practically touching the other.
What if I don't have the space? I've seen those small shop videos where people have their table saw shoved against a wall. Is that a cardinal sin in the Tiger Den?
I try not to be a zealot, but putting a table saw against a wall is like trying to run a marathon in a phone booth. Unless you only ever build birdhouses, you need that outfeed space. If you can't put the saw in the center, at least put it on wheels.
Actually, let's talk about wheels. Because Rick Campbell wrote about this recently, downsizing from a big shop to a one-car garage. He's obsessed with clearing the floor.
Rick's a smart man. If it doesn't move, it's an obstacle. In a small shop, mobility isn't just a luxury, it's your only escape route. I've reached the point where if I could put my workbench on wheels and still have it be rock solid, I'd do it in a heartbeat.
But wait, didn't you once say that a moving workbench is just a glorified cart?
I did. I was being a bit of a purist that day, but there are some clever ways to do it now. Retractable casters, where the bench sits on its own feet until you need to shift it. But for the heavy machinery, wheels change the game. You pull the joiner out when you need it, and when you're done, you tuck it back into its little parking space like you're putting a car in a garage.
Speaking of parking, Rick had a genius move for his router table. He got rid of the standalone one entirely.
He put it in the table saw wing. It's an old school move that more people need to jump on.
Why? Doesn't that just crowd the saw?
Think about it. Your table saw already has a massive flat surface and a high quality fence. Why build a second one? If you bolt a router plate into that right-hand extension wing, you've just reclaimed 4 square feet of floor space. That's enough space for a shop vac or a small scrap bin. In a tiny shop, 4 square feet is a kingdom.
So you're using the table saw fence for the router too?
You can. Just bolt a sacrificial face onto it so you don't chew up your good aluminum fence. Rick even went a step further. He used a lift that lets the bit drop completely below the table. 1 second you're routing a profile, the next you're ripping a board, and the router's just gone. Stealth woodworking.
Let's shift gears to the Zen part of the layout, the workbench. You're pretty adamant about where that goes.
Put it by the window. I mean it. If you have a window in your shop, that's where the bench belongs.
Is this just so you can watch the neighbor's dogs?
Part of it, sure. But natural light is the best quality control tool you own. You can have all the fancy LED shop lights in the world, but nothing reveals a sanding scratch or a gap in a dovetail like raw sunlight hitting the wood at an angle. Plus, woodworking involves a lot of staring and thinking. It's a lot nicer to stare at a tree than at a piece of damp drywall.
And the tools? You want them within arm's reach?
If I have to walk across the room to get my marking gauge, I've failed at shop design. Everything you use at the bench, chisels, mallets, squares, should be tucked right behind it or right under it. I call it the cockpit theory. You want to be the pilot. Everything should be accessible without your feet moving more than a couple of inches.
I've seen your cockpit, Tiger. It's more like an organized explosion.
It's a work in progress, but notice where the assembly table is. It's right in the middle.
Why the middle?
Because the assembly table is the grand central station of the shop. You're bringing parts from the saw, parts from the bench, parts from the finishing area. If it's tucked in a corner, you're constantly boxing yourself in. It needs to be the hub that everything else orbits.
And the clamps, let me guess, right next to the assembly table?
You're learning. There is nothing more stressful than having a glue up going south, glue is drying, boards are slipping, and you realize your parallel clamps are on the other side of the shop. You end up doing this awkward, lumbering run across the room while trying not to get Titebond on the floor. It's a comedy of errors that usually ends with a seam that won't close.
Okay, let's talk about the stuff no one likes to deal with. The hidden layout, electricity, and dust.
The plumbing of the shop. This is where people really get tripped up. Ralph Chapman talks about this in The Ultimate Small Shop, the idea of powering machines off the walls.
What does that mean?
Most people just plug everything into the nearest outlet and then spend the rest of their lives tripping over orange extension cords. That's a shop disaster waiting to happen. If you're laying out a shop, you want to think about drop downs from the ceiling or running your conduit along the walls in a way that keeps the floor clear.
And lighting.
More is more. My rule is, if you think you have enough light, add 2 more fixtures, especially over the shadows. If you can't see the blade, you shouldn't be using the tool.
What about the noise? You're in a garage, the neighbors are 5 feet away, and you're firing up a 15-amp planer that sounds like a jet engine taking off.
That's where soundproofing comes in. And I'm not talking about professional recording studio foam. Even just adding some insulation or using the cleat method for your cabinets can help dampen the vibration. But honestly, the best layout tip for noise? Put the loudest machines in the middle of the room, away from the shared walls.
That seems counterintuitive. Wouldn't you want to hide them?
If you put a planer right against a shared wall with your neighbor's bedroom, that wall acts like a speaker cone. It vibrates the whole house. If it's in the middle, the air around it acts as a bit of a buffer.
Let's get into the budget aspect. Ralph mentions a startup shop list for under $1,000. How does that affect layout?
When you have fewer tools, your layout is actually harder.
Wait, how?
Because each tool has to do more work. If you only have a circular saw and a drill, your workbench has to be your assembly table, your outfeed table, and your finishing station. You have to design the space for transition. It's like living in a studio apartment. The bed folds into the wall so you can have dinner.
So, versatility is the name of the game for the budget woodworker.
Exactly. Everything should be at the same height. If your workbench, your outfeed table, and your miter saw stand are all exactly 36 inches off the ground, or whatever your magic number is, then every surface becomes an extension of the others. You can support a 12-foot board across 3 different pieces of furniture.
That's a pro tip right there, the magic height.
It'll save your life when you're working alone.
We haven't talked about the finish line, the area where you actually put the oil or lacquer on.
Most people treat finishing as an afterthought. They finish the project and then realize they have nowhere to put it where it won't get covered in sawdust.
I've seen your finishing area. It's basically just anywhere I haven't swept lately.
Hey, I'm getting better. But really, you want your finishing area near a window for ventilation and as far away from the dusty tools as possible. If you can, put a curtain or a temporary divider up. There is nothing more heartbreaking than spent 3 weeks on a table only to have a stray puff of sawdust from the sander land right in your wet varnish.
It sounds like shop layout isn't a one-and-done thing.
It's never done. Your shop is a living organism. It'll grow, it'll shrink, it'll change as your skills do. I've probably moved my table saw 5 times in 10 years. Each time I thought I'd found the perfect spot.
And were you right?
For about 6 months. Then I bought a bigger joiner, and the whole puzzle had to be solved all over again.
So, what's the big takeaway for someone who's staring at a pile of tools and a cramped garage right now?
Don't get paralyzed by the perfect plan. Just start with the workflow. Trace the path of a board in your mind. If you find yourself walking in circles or tripping over a cord, fix that one thing.
And the floor, still staring at it?
Every day. But now I'm looking at it and seeing the lanes. Wood goes here, tools live there. And I stay in the middle trying to stay out of trouble.
Good luck with that.
I'll need it. Next week, we're talking about the Great Sandpaper Mystery. Why do we have 50 sheets of 80 grit and 0 sheets of 220?
Can't wait. See you in the den, Tiger.